The work we have been doing over the last few weeks has put us into an area of reassessing the reality of death. And what it really has done is changed our death door picture from one of darkness and gloom to one that we'll see now on the next slide. I'm not encouraging people to die so they can go to such a beautiful place. But what I think we're starting to see it as is a natural extension of life. It's just the nature of things that physical, mechanical types of instruments sooner or later break down. And that's what the body is. And so we realize that all bodies eventually give out either from sickness or just wear out, just like anything else does, whether it be a car, TV, or anything. But the person, what we have realized, the photon that operates that body, doesn't give out. And so now we realize that what we're talking about here is the death of a body, but not a person. Now, that kind of a beautiful picture doesn't take the fear out of dying or the upsetment about it because of the separation. But it does start to get us to a mature point where as adults we realize, hey, we're not talking about a heaven here. We're not talking about a hell here. We're talking about another chapter in normal life that we have led before and we're living now. And it tries to explain to us, it's just like, the leaves fall off the trees and then they come back, and we fall off the earth and then we come back. But there's a difference here, and we have to start thinking in whole different ways. We have to stop this obsession with, dead bodies and cemeteries and funeral parlors and start to think that, wait a minute, this is a person in an invisible form that left the body that could no longer sustain it. So now we have to direct our attention not to that body, which is broken and taken to the junkyard, but to that person which left the body. The unfortunate thing about all of this is that the overwhelming majority of people cannot possibly deal with this because of the fact that their minds have been broken by the threats and the fears of religion. Even as a little kid, we're told you're going to go to hell, a devil's going to get you. And all of these horrible things that we have had built into our minds, literally to scare us into submission, to submit to the cult, to the group, to the religion. And here's the problem. If you cannot abandon religion, you will never learn the truth. Never learn the truth. You'll never make contact with your deceased loved ones, and those who are trying to make contact with you when you previously died, you'll never know them because you'll never understand the complexities of the invisible photon spirit world, if you want to call it that. You'll never, ever know. You must abandon all concepts of religious thought. There's no other way. What you have to do is make a choice. You make a choice. And you set the people on two sides of a stage. And you say, who will I believe about this? And you set the pastors and the priests and the preachers and the rabbis on one side, and then you set the scientists and the physicists, etc., on the other side, and take your choice. Who knows Who can tell you about the subatomic quantum reality of life? The pastors and the priests and the ministers, or the physicists and the scientists? And it's obvious. But most people, just about everybody, doesn't even know who those physicists and scientists are. Because in my opinion, the physicists and the scientists are the real pastors. Why? Because what they do is tell you all about creation, all about the universe, all about you and how you operate and how you interact. And the guys in the robes on the other end of the stage have no clue. But who do we listen to? The guys in the robes on the other side of the stage. So the first thing, and we've shown this before, but it's a perfect, I think, slide to kind of show us what reality and what life really is. Okay? Here, as we look at this, these are the points that we Can you go back? Is there one? Oh, no, you can't go back. No, all right, just stay with it. Go ahead, John. All right, to totally disregard religion is the one thing that we have to do. We have to approach the subject scientifically, and we have to listen to the physicists and the scientists if we're going to make a decision. We have to take the statements of witnesses seriously. If somebody said they had a vision, then we want to sit down and say, what did you see? What did it look like? Who was it? I would love, and I don't think it's allowable, but I would love to go into nursing homes and sit down with people who have dementia and talk to them about the people they talk to. What did they look like? What did they say? Did they give you a name? Did they say, because we just, all we do with these people is disregard them and give them shots and drugs and keep them quiet and so forth. So we have to take witnesses seriously. And then the last thing is that we have to do research on opinions on the subject of dying and out-of-body experiences and near death and that kind of stuff. So let's see if I can get to the right point now. And this is what we've seen many times, but it's an important point. At the very top left-hand corner, you'll see a fetus, and you'll see the photon which enters the fetus on the 49th day. Becomes kind of a living being, then. See? Next, you see the fetus gives way and becomes a baby, and the photon now is in the baby's body. Can't do much with that, but it's there. Then it becomes a child, and the photon is able to use the body to do a little thing, play games and start to learn things and so forth. Then as we go up to the top, it becomes a teenager, and the photon then has a lot more that it can do as a teenager. Then it becomes an adult, and now the photon has access to all kinds of things. Then it becomes an elderly person all the way over at the right. Things are starting to run downhill a little bit. And at the very bottom is the death look, and the photon says to the lady laying here, "Lady, I'm out of here." And the body dies, and but the point here is, though the physical has gone from the fetus to the old person dying, the photon has stayed the same. The photon never got sick, never aged, never died, stayed the same from one part to the end. It just operated a different piece of equipment. It's no different than when you have that beautiful new car and you got the new car smell, and then at the very end you got the old car smell, and I got to get rid of this thing. It's the same thing. So it's not the body that you wish to communicate with or you have to think about, although that's the natural thing. If I think of my mother or father or my sister or my brothers who have all passed on, I think of them as physical beings. So I perceive, I create something in my mind of what they look like. But see, that is not the way that we're going to start to understand how to communicate with them, because we don't even look the way we look to one another. These are bodies. But I mean, inside with photon. So we want to create a way that we communicate with those loved ones, if you would, photon to photon, not photon to body. Okay? And you know, the important thing is, as we saw on that slide a moment ago, that when the body died, the photon was just as vibrant as it was when it entered the fetus, so death doesn't exist. See? Because a photon cannot die. Even if it is destroyed in a laboratory, it recreates itself. It pops up. So what are we talking about? What is so foolish about this is we, who cannot possibly die as photon, are totally consumed with the destruction of bodies that do that, because we've been brought up that way. That's the way we've been brought up. You know, we have been taught that a person dies when the body dies. We've never been taught that that's not true, that it's just the body that dies. So, given what we have studied through science, and given what it says in the Bible, it's impossible for God, whatever that is, to be anything but photon. Because the Bible, which has a basis in Greek science, says God is not human, God is light, and so God has to be photon. And Jesus, the Son of God, has to be photon. We were created in the image and likeness of God, has to be photon. So this is what this all is. So where else can we start? I mean, we have to start somewhere, and I have to have some kind of justification for where I start, because I'm talking to people, and I know there are people that watch this who are Christians, born-again Christians. They don't tell anybody that they would want, but they do. Because you know what? Even though you won't tell your friends that you've ever turned this on, you turn it on because it makes sense. And after all these years of nonsense, this makes sense. So if we use the Bible and we use science, how can anybody challenge that? You know, something that is not human but is light is photon. And no argument is possible, because that's the way it is. So here we are, the ones that can't die, talking about what happens after we die. What we have to be considering is, where do we go? I haven't found that yet, but I will find those rascals where they are. I haven't found it yet, but this is what I'm looking for. Where are they? And you know, the amazing thing is what we talked about last week, is that we have died before. And now we're here. And yet there are people who are looking at pictures of us saying, I miss her, I miss him so. And little kids saying, is Uncle Steve up in heaven? No, Steve's in Forked River. Folks, it's true. All those people that are crying over his picture and miss him so much, if they only knew he was sitting in the second row looking at me. So, I mean, you know, this is, but you see, we remember the people that have died and left us, but we don't remember the people that we have died and left. And there's a reason for that, and it's covered in the mythology, as I said last week, of Charon, the boatman who takes you across the river Styx, and when you get to Elysium, they say, do you want to go on to another adventure? Oh, yes. Well, if you do, you have to drink from the water of Lethe, the river of Lethe, L-E-T-H-E, and when you drink it, you forget. You have to forget. Can you imagine if you came each life remembering all the others? You'd go nuts. You'd go completely nuts. What do you mean I can't have that job? Well, in my last life, I was superintendent of the hell out of here. So these are all of the exciting, amazing, and fun things to look forward to and to be involved in and to be challenged to find, operating on a photon level to find those who have left us and bring back the memories of those we have left. Oh, and listen, if you're going to leave religion, which you should do, and start thinking, there are stories that you can read of. There's one of a child, this is making the rounds now, who remembers being in a fighter plane in the Second World War and being shot down by the Japanese, and he remembers the name of the guy who was in the plane next to him, and he remembers what kind of plane it was, and he remembers that when the planes used to land, the Corsairs, they had a lot of trouble with the tires, and this kid never knew. I mean, it's impossible not to know that. And then there's the kid over in Scotland who remembered where his house was in his previous life, and he knew his mother's name and then they took him, and Dr. Jim Tucker of the University of Virginia took him to this island in Scotland, and they found there was a White House there, and they asked the people that had the tax records, and they said to the kid, well, do you remember your name when you were? And he said, Robertson. And the lady looked, she said, well, there is a White House. It's empty now, but there were people in there by the name of Robertson. How could that be? There's this little Spanish kid that picked up a guitar and he plays this thing like a master. And then this other little kid, he's about 2 feet high. He picked up a trumpet and you think it was Al Hurt. How is that possible? If they didn't live. Of course people lived before. You lived before. But we're forced to believe all this lunacy by religious people that won't accept the very things that are so beautiful and the very things that the Bible supports. Yeah, the female astronaut who remembered that she was in this spaceship that crashed and when it was coming through the atmosphere, and she was from India, and all this stuff. But you see, we don't even think about it. When we hear about it, we laugh about stuff like that because we're raised by the robed wizards. Please. If we're going to meet together, and if we're going to explore the subject of death and realize it doesn't exist, and then talk about our previous lives, and talk about... I was reading the other day, and you remember this guy, Weiss, Brian Weiss? He said he had a woman was brought to him who could only speak Chinese. All she could say was, whatever. And they were doing a past life regression on her, and he had a Chinese interpreter there so that he could tell her what he wanted to do, and the Chinese interpreter would tell her in Chinese, taking her back. And when he took her back, finally, she started talking in English. What are you going to tell me? You're going to tell me this Brian Weiss is a liar too? And only Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson tell the truth? Stop! Okay? But when we get to understand the photon, then we'll lose this fear of death and we'll start to look forward to the reality of reuniting with the photon lives that have been a part of us. We have been deceived by religion into thinking that we are physical bodies instead of understanding that we use physical bodies. We've gone through so much study here concerning photons and the subatomic. We should be able to grasp the truth concerning death instead of dwelling on it. We know that we came from somewhere when our last body died. Now think about this. You're wondering where someone you loved that died went. Those others were wondering when you died where you went. And where did you went? You went here. Forked River, New Jersey. You didn't go to heaven. You didn't go to hell. You went to Forked River. So you see what I'm saying to you? So where's everybody else? Where's your husband that died? Where's your wife that died? Where's your uncle that died? Where are they, in Pittsburgh? Or maybe they're in Hong Kong? Or maybe they're in Borneo or Australia. Who knows? But if you're here, why aren't they there or here or wherever? Do you see what I'm saying? It's so simple if we'll start accepting and understanding it and stop believing the robed wizards and start believing those people of science who are sharing the realities of this thing. Yeah, I've had cars going back to the 1950s, but except for the one I have now, they all died, but I'm still here. So we've had bodies going back to infinity, and they all died, but you're still here. And the only reason you don't understand this stuff is because your mind was given over to this lunacy that came out of the dark ages of Europe. So what's reality? What is reality concerning us, and who are the witnesses who have instructed us? Okay? Let's take a look. Professor Max Tegmark, Massachusetts Institute, David Deutsch, Oxford University, Paul Steinhardt, Princeton, showed us that parallel universes exist and that there are copies of us living in those parallel universes. Now you can turn them down and turn to the priests and the ministers, or you can say, no, I want to talk to these guys. That's what I've chosen to do. The Bible told us that God, Jesus, and we are light, which means we're photons. The Bible writers had access to Greek scientific thoughts, which included the subatomic. So that's witness. NASA and physicist John Kramer told us that when electrons become excited, they send out photons to the past and the future and also absorb photons. And we learned about photons from them. Okay? We'll go to the next slide. We learned that entangled photons are one both when they are entangled and disentangled. I want to come back here for a minute. Do you know what this means? Do you know what this means? This means that you have photon. Here's one photon. Okay? Now, and they're way off on opposite ends of the infinity, and they're one. They're not two. They're still one. That's quantum. Sorry. That's the new physics that was so challenging to Albert Einstein. We'll come back here. We learned for entangled photons to bring a third photon into the entanglement, one entangled photon must sacrifice its properties and take on the properties of the third one. This explained the sacrifice of Jesus to save us. Now we'll come back here. You see what I mean? Here is God. Here is Jesus. And they're entangled. They're one. But they're walking around and they say, "Whoa, there's Paul. What are we going to do with him? And there's Joan and Steve. We got to get these people because we want them up here. We want them part of us." What has to happen is the entanglement has to end. The Jesus photon has to come down, enter into our photon, give itself up, take on our properties, and then go back into the entanglement with the God photon. The sacrifice of the Jesus photon makes, for God's sakes, it explains the whole damn thing. The whole thing is explained, and it makes sense, and we understand what it was all about. Wow. To me, that is good stuff. Okay. We learned in the next one, Joan, we learned that when entangled photons separate, they are still one. So Jesus saying, "I and the Father are one, and when you have seen me, you have seen the Father, and I pray they all may be one, as you and I are one," it makes sense. Because even though they're separated, one's in heaven, one's on the earth, There's still one. And then it says we learned that excited electrons send photons not only to the future but to the past. So we should be able to communicate not only with those who left us and who have died here, but those that we left when we died someplace else. Okay? All right. So there is a thumbnail sketch of what we have been able to develop so far, which brings forth initial reference to photon from the Bible, and then allows us to present photon from science and from physicists. Now, there was another important part that we did learn, and I do want to add it to our summary before we close the summary out. Let's go back to the slide. We learned that the retinas of your eyes pick up photon signals from physical objects. That's how you see. And then have them deciphered by the brain, which translates them into images. That's how you see things, okay? But then we learned that the pineal gland picks up photon signals from non-physical objects and sends the information to the retinas, which then has the signals deciphered, giving us an illusion of seeing someone who is physically not there. You want to come back here. Here's the deal there. You go in, like you said, into a nursing home, and you see somebody, and they're talking to somebody, and there's nobody there. But you see, their change in the brain as they get elderly or whatever, are getting ready to transfer over, their change allows them to pick up that photon through the pineal, which is then dispatched to the retina of the eye, giving them the illusion of seeing something. They're actually seeing something that you and I can't see. But there's an explanation for it, a scientific quantum explanation for it. Now here's something else, and we'll go to the next slide, that Jesus said, and let's take a look at it. Jesus said, if your eye be single, your body will fill with light. Well, to confirm that, we learned that melatonin, secreted by the pineal in the dark, distributes photon light throughout the body. That confirms the scripture above and confirms the need for meditation in darkness. And that's why we do have meditation in the darkness. So there's two important items here. The pineal does distribute light throughout the body, as Jesus said. And then it is essential that your meditation be in the dark. Because unless you're in the dark, you're not going to have that melatonin flowing. Okay? So the next obvious and justifiable question would be, okay, these issues are okay for photons. But how can we confirm what the Bible says, that we are photons? When the question of death arises, then our fear is built around our fear of losing ourself, our consciousness, me, you know? I mean, when we're alone, that's all we are involved in is me inside of here. Feeling of self. And you know what Rene Descartes said? Rene Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. In other words, there is an I. And think of this inside of yourself. There is an I, which is you beyond the body, because the body cannot think. Huh? No, your body cannot think. You think. Therefore, you are. I am. It can only act out the program that you program into it, your body. So the thinker isn't the body. The thinker is the photon, which means I am photon because I think. Now, if we can do that, if we can determine that consciousness is photon, then we can realize what we truly are and move on beyond the question of death, looking for those we remember without regard to looking for their bodies. We're looking for their self. We're looking for their I. See? Can we take away the name we gave them? They don't have that name anymore. Can we take away their physical appearance? They don't have that physical appearance anymore. And even like you've got a name. Who gave you that name? They probably flipped the coin. One said, I want to call him Steve. The other said, no, I want it to be Jerome. Flip a coin. Steve won, heads or tails. That's what happens. A lot of you are here by mistake. Your father wound up meeting your mother, and they got all involved, and all things got hot. I didn't want this to happen, Gloria. Well, I know, neither did I. How are we going to explain it? I don't know. Jeez, we better get married early. And here you are. A big mistake. That's all it is. It's not your name. It's not what you look like. And sometimes you look at your nose, you say, geez, I wish it wasn't like that, but that's the way the old man was. See, if we can close on and learn what these friends of ours, these loved ones of ours, they can still call me Bill because I still am Bill, but we have a problem calling them by name. But, we do that. But I'll show you how we'll start to rise above that into that photon. And then you got to remember something. I want you to raise your hands. Who in this room can remember the family you were with before you came into this life? Nobody. So now you've got your loved one in another place and somebody asking him or her, can you remember your past life? I don't know. You see? So how then can we get through to them if they can't remember us? How can those who are trying to get through to us if we can't remember them? But there are those that do remember. How come? Has the little kid remember flying that plane? Has the kid remember to pick up the trumpet? How does the girl remember being the astronaut? There are those. So it's not cut and dry. So, having studied all of this material, I found myself backed into a corner where I had to declare myself. I could no longer hide from the truth that I know within me. So I will declare myself. And I am a very difficult person to say all of this stuff because I have told you forever, don't believe anything. But I want to declare myself. Okay? These are my beliefs. I believe we are photons and exist eternally even after our physical body dies. I believe out-of-body experiences are real. I believe near-death experiences are real. I believe UFOs are real and are operated by beings from another dimension. Not only that, I saw one. Right over my head, about 500 feet. A big triangular thing. After it was done with me, it moved south and didn't make a noise, and nobody else ever said they saw it. I believe crop circles are created by beings from another dimension. Even if somebody with a board went out there and made them, somehow their minds were instructed what to make. Next one. I believe that it is possible to communicate with those who have physically passed on, and we will be doing that. I believe people with dementia are in contact with real beings from another dimension. I believe that dreams are real experiences in parallel universes. And I believe all of these things are perfectly natural and normal. And there's nothing supernatural because there's no need for that. And I believe religion is a fraud. I had to just sneak that in. I've always taken the position to believe nothing, but based on the studies from credible scientists and my meditations as well, this is what I believe. But you choose for yourself. You don't have to believe anything. And how can you? But I mean, somewhere you have to take... I mean, if you're going to sit down with an electrician and he's going to tell you how he's going to install the light and how he's going to make it light, you either believe him or you say you'll do it yourself. And you know you don't know how to do it. So, because of his skills and his ability, any documentation he provides as to how he's going to do this, you believe him. This is what it comes from. Scientists document. Scientists show proof. Scientists show scientific evidence. I forget what I'm looking for. Physics types of diagrams and things. Really, it shows nothing. I mean, science tells you Adam and Eve was nuclear fission, and by taking the ion out of an atom, taking the electron out of an atom, you made a positive ion, and putting it in another one, you made a negative ion, and it was an ionic bond, and it brought forth positive and negative male and female. That's what the scientists say. And the preachers said what? God took a rib out of a woman and made a woman out of spare ribs. And you know what? We don't believe the scientists about quantum. We believe ladies are spare ribs. So my search here is not to find the dead, but to locate the photons that occupied the bodies that I knew in the three-dimensional. And I know that I have to search in the quantum subatomic realm. And I have to depend on my three-dimensional brain to correctly decipher what I pick up and relay it through my eyes. Now, once I'm out of the body, once you're out of the body, you don't need that. Because you know everything. You know everything from the past. You know everything from the future. How do I know that? Because photons do. Photons know everything that's ever going to happen in the future. They know everything that ever happened in the past. And as soon as you leave your body, you will know. But once you get inside of this thing, you're shut right down. So when we think of the enormity of this, try to grasp the fact. Try to grasp that fact. A photon knew 10,000 years ago that two people were going to come together, have sex, the woman was going to get pregnant, and that photon was going to come nestle in that fetus, and it was you. I knew it thousands of years ago. Before there was ever, even the United States was founded, let alone had your mother and father be born. You say, well, wait a minute, how could that be possible? How could a photon know in advance that there was going to come and be in the fetus? I mean, how would it know in advance? Because it's God. That's what the Bible said. It's God. That's what God is. Right? All photonic parts of the great central photon, universal photon. When we were last here, I guess, we focused on scientific evaluations of out-of-body experiences, and we discussed the work of Olaf Blanc of Switzerland. And this is Olaf. He found that electrically stimulating one brain region, the right angular gyrus, repeatedly triggered out-of-body experiences. And Blanc and his team were using electrodes to excite the brain of a woman being treated for epilepsy. And every time they would touch, they'd say, okay, 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 okay. Huh? That's right, that's right. I'm on the ceiling. What do you mean you're on the ceiling? I'm looking down at you. Okay, I'm back down. Okay, I'm back down. I'm back down. Okay, yeah. I'm on the ceiling. Every time they touched the right angular gyrus with the electrode, she was on the ceiling. Now, was she really on the ceiling? No. She was lying on the table. So who was on the ceiling? The photon person was on the ceiling. Now, what am I going to do? Say this guy's full of baloney too, and so I got to believe Father McFeely and not believe him? No, of course not. Of course not. But you'll find a million people who know about Jerry Falwell or Pat Robertson or all these crazy people. But you know, who knows Olaf Blanc? Nobody. But he's the only one that can prove about an out-of-body experience and how it happens. Yet you go up to your person as a Christian and say, out of body, I don't believe in that stuff. And yet the very Bible that they kiss and they put on Grandma's piano says, I would rather be...
present with the Lord.
What is it?
To be present with the Lord.
To be
absent.
absent from the body and be present with the Lord. Thank you, Al. See, Al's very good about it. I just dropped off the wall there. I went to photon land. That was great. You just drop right off the world, you know. The whole thing is there. To be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Now, you take a look at this next and you say, well, look at this. This is, who is up on the ceiling? And this is what the point is. It wasn't her brain or her eyes or her head. They were all on the table. So the only rational explanation would be it was the photon. The photon that abandoned the body upon getting the electric signal. See, when your body is getting ready to die, it's going to ship an electric signal to the right angular gyrus, and a door like it's in the Walmart is going to open up, and you say, I'm out of here. That's what it does. And that's what they found. See? So this, then, would indicate that the photon self, the person, receives a signal from the right angular gyrus to leave the body at the time of major failure. And the photon, which knows everything, is then outside the body, free from the attachment because of the major failure. So we know that the signal, in this particular case, was a false alarm, because as soon as they took... You see, get this. He takes the probe, touches the right angular gyrus, she's on the ceiling. Now, if this was a real death thing, she'd be on the ceiling, and then off she'd go. But in this particular case, it wasn't. It was a false alarm. So as soon as the electricity was removed from the right angular gyrus, she's back into the vital body. The body is still vital. So the important point here is that we have professional witnesses to this, even in the person of neurologists like Olaf Blank, whose video we watched a couple of weeks ago. Now, given the fact that we understand the photon to be intelligent, and the photon knows all things, we had an interesting study brought to us by physicist Pim van Lommel. He's from Eastern Europe somewhere. And he told us about a curious situation of a man who came into the hospital who had some kind of an attack, a cardiac arrest, and he was in a coma. Okay? And so when they brought the man into the hospital, he was completely comatose. And while he was there, they took his teeth out so he wouldn't swallow them. And then when they brought him finally back about, a week later, so it was about 10 days before he regained full consciousness, everybody was looking for his dentures. And nobody knew where the heck was his dentures. And so this nurse walks in and he said, "You took them." She said, "What are you talking about?" "You took the dentures out of my mouth and you put them on that little cart, and on that cart there's a little drawer under it, and you put them in there." And she said, "Oh my God, this man was totally comatose, was brain dead, and saw this." See? And so this is what we have to take, and we have to take it seriously. So if we're going to learn about physical death and what happens and what happened to our loved ones, we have to be prepared to accept these things from witnesses, professional witnesses. The photon knows everything. There is no more glaring description of how the photon knows everything than from the work of the noted physicist John Cramer. We've gone over this, but you should go over this again and again and again so you really know. When you talk about dealing with photons, you're dealing with a person. A photon is a person. Look, John Cramer, every particle that wants to give up a photon looks deep into the future to find another particle that will accept the photon. These elementary particles know the layout of the future. When a deal is negotiated, the first particle lets the photon fly off on its path, knowing full well where the other particle that accepts the photon will be when it finally gets there. Just think of that. Here's the photon up here. And there you, on the other side of the universe. And it has to get to you. So it leaves 10,000 years ago, and it's ready because the deal was already worked out that you were going to be there on July 10th, 2009 at 9 o'clock, and it shows up at July 10th, 2000, and there you are. And you say, oh, how is that possible? Because it's God. And it knows all things. Now for the first time in your life, you understand how God knows all things. Because photons know all things. And then in this next slide, Kramer goes on and he tells us, so go out and look at a nearby star. Say Sirius if you're in the northern hemisphere. Sirius is 10 or so light years away. Now listen what he says. The photons that hit your eye knew that at the time they left the star 10 years ago that they would hit electrons in your retina. And if you go back in, the other photons coming knew that they would hit the sidewalk. These deals were negotiated 10 years ago with particles in a star 10 light years away, long before you ever thought to look at the star. Do you see what I mean? That means 10 years from now, you're going to look at a star. And that photon is leaving that star right now, so it's here when you look. See, when we think we know everything, we don't know anything about the magnificent majesty of what really this is all about. And now look, we're finding that all of these things have explanations in this subatomic realm, in this quantum realm. They all have explanations. There's no hocus pocus. There's no need of faith or anything like that. Let me take a look at this. 10 light years away. How far did that light, that photon, have to come to touch the retina of your eye tonight at 9 o'clock? Let's look. 1 light year is 5.88 trillion miles. 10 light years is 58.8 trillion miles. So traveling at 186,400 miles per second, the photon takes 10 years. So 10 years ago, the photon knew you were going to look at it tonight at 9 o'clock, and it has to be here. So you better show up. You better go out there and look. That'll be a hell of a thing. Wouldn't that thing drive awesome? By grasping this, you're getting a better understanding of what this entity we call God really is. How awesome when you consider that what you're reading is provable science that's proving God. You don't know what you're going to do tomorrow, but Photon left the station 10 years ago to travel 58.8 million miles to meet you tonight. That's what God is. So it's all built on our perception. Everything is instant, really. There is a scripture that is very clear about the nature of living being, the nature that cannot die. After the crucifixion story, remember that? We find Jesus' disciples coming to the grave where Jesus' body was interred. And the body wasn't there, but there was a couple of angels there, so they were hanging around. And the angels in this mythology talk to these people coming to the cemetery. Same thing when you go to the cemetery to visit some body. And look what the angel says. They were afraid, bowed down their faces, and the angel said to them, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" Why are you there looking for somebody who is alive over here, and you're staring down at a dead body in the ground? We go to graveyards, we go to funeral parlors. We'd be better off going to a seance. Let me repeat it. We'd be better off going to a seance and looking for the photon. But why do we do this? Because we don't know what else to do, because the pastors have told us we should. Religion has cut us off from any possible contact with the departed by classifying it as demonic if you try to get in touch with the dead. You stupid fool, there is no such thing as a dead person. Arthur Young is a noted physicist and author, and he speaks of the photon, and he identifies it, and he identifies its purpose. And this is Arthur Young. Arthur Young, born in 1905, died in 1995, was an American inventor, a helicopter pioneer, a cosmologist, philosopher. He was the designer of Bell Helicopter's first helicopter, the Model 30, and inventor of the stabilizer bars used on many of Bell's early helicopter designs. And he founded the Institute for Consciousness in Berkeley in 1972, and he's authored many books. Christian De Quincey talked about Arthur Young, and I wanted just to go over a couple of these things with you about Arthur Young. And this is what Arthur Young said. Arthur Young's theory of process starts with consciousness, or spirit, as the primary reality. Young does not derive the quantum from consciousness. For Young, the quantum is consciousness. Spirit is the quantum of action. Read that again. Quantum is consciousness. In Young's cosmology, the ultimate constituent of reality is what? The photon. The quantum of light. The quantum of action. In other words, Young equates the light of the physicist and the light of the mystic. I love this. The physicist's photon is the mystic's divine light. Yeah? The physicist's photon is the mystic's divine light. What you're reading about is, I saw the light, hallelujah, Jesus, I saw. No, I saw the photon. The photon has touched me. You see? Now let's go on to what else he says. Young also points out that the photon is beyond time and space. It is beyond time because the photon always travels at the speed of light, and at that speed time ceases to exist. It is beyond space because a single photon can traverse the entire universe without losing any energy. In other words, it experiences no distance or space between the start and the end of its journey. And this complements John Kramer's presentation that the photon from a star knows when you're going to look at it. And it must travel to be where you are because it's all instant. And De Quincey says this, for other reasons, Young says the photon is the most unusual entity studied by physics. Not only does it transcend time and space, it has no mass. As Young describes, it is pure action, creative and personal, completely free in all dimensions. And this, he says, is as good a definition of spirit as science could hope for. So you see, when you're talking about the Holy Spirit and all this stuff, you're talking about the holy photon. And then look what De Quincey says at Young. And he arrives at the equation of photon equals consciousness by a very straightforward extension of normal physics. That standard physics, based on the parameters of mass, length, and time, has consistently overlooked the fourth parameter. And this is what it is. The formula for deriving control, and control implies change. See, don't let this get away from you to where you think, oh, this is too confusing. You control everything you do. You control the fact that you are here tonight. You control the fact you're going to get in your car. You control the fact that which way. That's consciousness. And what Young is saying is that's photon. See, it's a matter of asking an obvious question: what is the third derivative? The first derivative is velocity. The second is acceleration, and that's where physics stops. But by taking the next clearly logical step, physics opens up to include control, and therefore choice, and therefore consciousness, and that's where Arthur Young proves that photon is conscious. Photon is you. I just have a few minutes here, but I wanted to touch on this because last week we discussed the commentary on a recent crop circle from England. And a physicist and another scientist looked at the crop formation and arrived at a conclusion relative to July 7th. They came to the conclusion that these formations were spelling out a corona mass ejection from the sun, which would hit the Earth with negative electromagnetic power. Do you want me to tell you something? Do you know what the Earth is doing right now? Now, it's creating another ocean. It's opening like you would tear the seam of a shirt. And the scientists right now are not saying much to people, but they're thinking, if the corona's ejection that is number 24, which is supposed to be so powerful leading up to 2012, it's as powerful as they are concerned it could be. The rip could be something that could cause the oceans to rise to the point that the entire African continent would disappear. I mean, we go along in our daily Walmart life with no concept of what the hell really going on here. But anyhow, about July 7th, we showed you last week NASA had predicted the solar storms leading up to the period of 2012. And then in this particular thing here, we'll show you this crop circle. And it said, based on the previous examples from 204 to 209, we can be pretty sure the crop formation intelligence use of the teardrop symbol represents a coronal mass ejection from the sun. Why then would they have drawn the planet Earth in the form of a large teardrop unless several coronal mass injections will impact the Earth very soon? And then in the next slide, it said jellyfish or distorted Earth's magnetic field swept by strong solar wind after coronal mass injection from sun lines up with the sunset on July 7th, 2009. Now, July 7th, 2009 came and went. Everybody here seemed to have survived very well, which is good. But there's an organization, well, it's not an organization, it's an observatory. And the observatory is called the, let me see if I can find it here, the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, which observes the sun activity and communicates to NASA. Well, inasmuch as nothing happened on July 7th, this is the report that came from SOHO. And it says, July 7th, 2009, SOHO reporting second large solar flare. Is this sudden solar intensity what the crop formation intelligence has forecast since April 14th after the sun's unusually long spotless quiet? Now, let me change something here. July 7th, SOHO reported the second large solar flare. Below that was the Earth file commentary. SOHO did not make that commentary below about the solar flare, but they did report a solar flare on July 7th. And then in the next thing we have about spaceweather.com reports sunset 1024 has cracked with B and C class solar flares. Solar observers haven't seen an active region like this one in more than 2 years. It is big, complex, and rapidly growing. The magnetic polarity of the sunspot revealed by SOHO magnetograms show that it is a member of the new solar cycle 24. So if the crop formation was pointing to solar eruptions, and if, as you see, there was the beginning of solar eruptions on July 7th, as predicted by those who evaluated the formations, and if this is in harmony with what NASA said about solar eruptions being significant up through 2012, then we are facing the reality of a higher intelligence communicating with us about 2012 and would substantially support the previous information that we provided to you through Apocalypse Lowtown right up through Jesus. You know, I'll tell you something as we wrap this. We have a tendency to get a bit bored when things don't happen in spectacular enough fashion. You know, because when somebody says July 7th, and then you have July 7th and nothing happens. Ah, boy, you know, that proved. But something did happen. But even if nothing happened, you've sat in church all of your life, and what the hell has ever happened? They're still singing the same songs. They're reading the same stories. As a kid, I used to see them on the street corners in Newark at Broad Market Street saying, Jesus is coming, prepare the way for the Lord. What? And nobody ever says anything about these people. So you ever want to deprive a person evaluate something and say, oh, this looks like July 7th. July 7th comes. Well, NASA said they expected the supernova 1987A to explode in 2005. It never did. But you know what? That doesn't mean they were wrong. It just means that they missed the mark on the prediction, but it's going to explode. Whether it's today or whether it's tomorrow, or whether it's next week or whenever it is. I'm going to show you next time some very, very interesting things about the book of Revelation as far as, there's one interesting thing. Oscar Guido was here last week. And he wrote me and he said, there's references in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, to the number 1260. And he said, if that crop circle specified July 7th, and the July 7th flare left the sun, as now we proved that it did, from July 7th to December 21st, 2012, is 1,260 days. Exactly. And I wrote it back and I said, yes, 1,260 days. And there's two references also to things that are going to happen in 40 and 2 months. And from July 7th, 2009 to December the 21st, 2012 is exactly 40 and 2 months. I'm going to show you some of those things that I'm going to let you get a real good look inside behind the book of Revelation. Not in a lot of whiz-bang stuff, because tell you where people make a lot of mistakes with the book of Revelation. Most of the book of Revelation is written in such a way as to deceive people who are looking for purpose to suit their own needs. And so there's all kinds of crazy stuff which people pay a lot of attention to. The serpent with 10 heads, and all of this kind of stuff. Well, I don't think those 10 heads mean the 10 European Confederates. Stop. Doesn't mean any of that. All this stuff is there to cover what is being taught. And I'll tell you what the book of Revelation talks about is the destruction of the environment,